to get to is a healing. So my resiliency motto is people heal.
Thank you, Luke.
You're welcome.
You like to
Sure. So I'm Jennifer Santos. I am the communications coordinator for the California Family Resource Association. And my resiliency motto would be just knowing that whenever I'm facing adversity, that there's something good coming after that once I face it. So that's how I get through that.
I'm Michael Williams. I'm the Strategies Director at the CAP Center here in Sacramento. I had two quotes came to mind, and I thought, and like I had one, they're both kind of famous, and so I had one set up as a plan B. I'm not going to say either of them till we go all around, because somebody else might say one of them, and I don't want to steal their thunder. And I realized that my resiliency motto is actually have a plan B.
Okay.
I like. Very nice. Who wants to go next? Can we come right over here?
Sure. I'm Nicole Neon. I'm a community outreach specialist with Help Me Grow Yolo County. So I usually work with families of children birth through 5, and I would say, I very often say, tomorrow will be a new day.
Very nice. Very nice. We'll go next.
My name is Liz Sardinas, and I'm a social worker by training, but my title is Community Outreach Specialist at Help Me Grow Yolo County as well. And my resiliency motto actually has 2 parts of it. One is one connection, one drop. So you just make a connection sometimes, and it's just one drop in the bucket of positivity. So even if it's just one little thing, you can do those little things every day and do no harm. Those are the 2 things that I try really hard to work by.
Hi, everyone. I'm Ian Hadley. I'm the Executive Director of the 916 Inc. And I took this a little bit differently. My resiliency, as I thought about resiliency, what I wanted to express is that I think resiliency is learned. And the reason that I state that is I think sometimes we think that people innately have this ability to continue and face each challenge confidently, whereas in reality, these are skills that people gain over time.
I'm Sherry Schroeder, and I wear several hats. So I'm also with the Child Abuse Prevention Center in Sacramento doing California Foster Youth Initiative. So working with foster youth, and on my other hat that I've been my 33rd year is with Yolo County and serving Yolo County foster youth, but at Woodland Community College as the Director of Foster and Kinship Care Education, Independent Living Skills Program, and all things foster care, grants, etc. So I suffer with a lot of my entire life with anxiety. So my personal resilience, not so much out for my professional stuff, is to stop, to breathe, and to go run. And it has served me beautifully well for not only my mental health, also for my physical health. I came from a family where my mother at the end of her life could not even walk because of all of her hips and legs. So I have just diligently thought I want to keep that beautiful gift. And then professionally, I tell people, I did it all the way here on the phone and twice before I picked up Sweet Rebecca this morning, that really this too shall pass. Like, you just need to get through it. All of you have already said it, and then something different will come and be in its place. You'll learn.
Hi, everyone. I'm Brenda Diaz. I'm a project manager for the Child Abuse Prevention Center. My resiliency motto is very personal, and it's let go and let God. It's more of anything that happens is not under my control, so things will work out.
Hi, I'm Rebecca Couch. I also wear several hats. I do contract speaking for the Foster Kinship Care Education in Woodland, a volunteer liaison for Family Huey, and I also serve on the California Foster Council. And I'm a stay-at-home mom with a child who has severe mental illness, and so that is a really big hat that I'm wearing right now. And I also have served on the Maternal Mental Health Committee, and so I just try to stay really active in the community. My resiliency motto is, you never know how strong you are until strength is the only thing you have. And the reason why that's a resiliency motto is because even when all seems lost, you have the strength within you to even just endure the moment, if not surpass whatever's going on.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Nita. I'm a consultant here in Sacramento. I work with a bunch of nonprofits. Thanks for having me here today. My motto, it kind of piggybacks off of Troy's, but I wrote down always moving forward together. So no matter what, keep pushing forward and bring the people along with you.
Well, thank you very much. I tried to get as many of them down, one or two that I'm going to, because I'm going to steal those, nonprofit trainers. We don't have a big budget, so we got to steal curriculum information. I heard some phenomenal words that were really important in this that kind of overlapped, and things like breathe. The breathe. Rebecca and I were talking earlier. It's interesting because folks, and she has had similar experience, that folks will come and say, "Troy, you did that great training. Can you help me with my family?" No, I'm running my own resiliency model, right? So I put that out there because bottom line is we're all kind of in this together. I hate being considered something like a subject matter expert, because if you came into my house, you start to question my training skills. And that's life. That's the real. I can't account for 4 kids, 2 dogs, and a cat, and a wife, not in that order. So you can't account for the behavior. You can't account for some of the outcomes. And I think that's what this is all about. That's about a plan B. It's about making sure that this too shall pass. And it is interesting because you guys channeled a phenomenal philosopher, Lucille Benton. You guys know who Lucille Benton is? No? Of course you don't. It's my grandma. And this too shall pass was something that she said often. And also, she would say, Maya Angelou's quote of life is oftentimes not a crystal staircase. That's resiliency right there. It's talking about being knowledgeable that's going to be tough, but knowing that there is a tomorrow. Well, with that, I have 2 people online that we'd also like to, 3 people online, and would also like to give their introductions. So Lana's going to unmute you. You can give us your name, your title, your agency, and your resiliency motto. Susan, are you on the line?
Yes, I can.
Very nice. So can you give us your name, title, agency, and motto?
Oh, okay. Well, Susan Ferdinandi. I'm community program coordinator at the Children's Network of Solano County. And we don't have a resiliency motto, so I'll have to get back to you on that, an actual motto.
That's perfectly fine.
What did you say?
I said that's great. That's fine, because what I did was you got cheated out of the time. I gave this group a heads up probably before you got online, so they got to think about it a little bit. So don't think that they're really that much of an overachiever. All right.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. Who's next? Dolores, are you there?
This is Dolores Barrett. I'm with Community Action Partnership of Orange County. And like her, I listened to them and I was wondering, did we need to develop one, because I don't have a resiliency motto either.
So now you have your first homework.
Absolutely.
Right? Resiliency motto. And if you need any help, you have me, so you can give me a call. We can come up with one together. I got a whole bunch of music and movies, and we could go through them and come up with our motto. Deal?
It's a deal.
Right. So I'm also going to be giving the folks online further instructions throughout the day, so just stay tuned, and we'll keep you connected. And I believe we have one more.
We do have one more. We do have one more person. Tracy is joining us online. She's going to be in listening mode today. But this is Tracy Carlton, project coordinator for Amador Capsy and First by Bannister. And her motto is more of a practice than a motto. It's stay connected to those who believe in you.
Stay connected to those that believe in you. I often ask, when I talk about self-care, I ask audiences if they have a cheerleader. Because if you don't, go find one. And luckily, I'm the youngest boy in my family, so you can imagine what my cheerleading squad looks like. When my grandmother, my mother, my 2 sisters, and 3 aunts got together, it was a football game waiting to happen. So find your cheerleader. Find somebody that when you're down, not only are going to pick you up, they're also going to tell you the truth. They're going to be straight with you, you know? It's that come on man relationship where they can come to you and say, Lindsay, come on, man. Come on, lady. Come on, friend. You know, so picking yourself up, making sure you breathe, having a plan B, realizing that resiliency is a process, not a destination. And that's what we're kind of going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how we begin to build resiliency within our community. So first, I'd like to talk about our toolkit a little bit. The toolkit was developed by Wendy Ellis and William Deese. And I can't express enough about the collaborative nature of not only how this was developed, but how it was purported to be used. If you guys could turn to page 9 of your toolkit, you should have that in there where I'm kind of going to start. So the biggest part for me is the innovative and transformative approach of this, and that it's not for just boots on the ground, that it can certainly be utilized by new and old workers, workers that are seasoned, workers that are new to the field, and it's all based in collaboration. And I wanted you to turn to page 9 because that's the intended usage. It's used to assess, to talk about your readiness. Are we even in the window of change? I oftentimes tell new workers that the toughest part for me when I came into this industry is no one prepared me for how many times I'd fail. No one ever told me that if you have 100 people, you'll probably really, really help 10. You might kind of help another 10. You're going to plant some seeds with about 10 more, and then the rest, it might not be the time for them to be touched. And you've got to be able to deal with that. That's some secondary trauma that we often deal with, is not realizing that I may not have the tools for this person, or they may not be ready. So not only assessing readiness of individuals and families, but readiness of the community. And that's where we're going to go today, assessing readiness. And then talking about implementation and sustainability. If anybody's been to any of our trainings lately, we're really talking about implementation, realizing that training has to spark your interest. Training has to be innovative. But you've got to go do the homework afterwards with regards to implementation. And then the final aspect to that in that chart is sustainability. How do we make this move over time? How do we maintain it, both physically, financially, emotionally, various things like that. So this model takes into account all of those sorts of things. It takes into account what collaboration should look like. How do we develop from the foundation, from the grassroots effort, something that's a process and a procedure moving towards sustainability. So I'd like you to look at some of the volumes. So if you could turn to page 10. So the volume we have today is our first volume. And what our hope is that our next 3 learning communities will begin to address these topics. Now, I can't promise that each of those volumes will be out at that point, but know that that topic area is where our focus with regards to strategies and our movement will look. So the shared understanding, an understanding of not only the problem, but our resource, and a shared understanding of the language that we're using. We're going to talk a little bit about some key concepts that are in this document and how we want them to be used. Next is the state of readiness. Is your agency ready? Are you ready? Is the community ready? And if not, are there some seeds that we can plant to help foster this readiness at another time? Then the cross-sector partners. How do we pull in the people? And classically, we know the choir that we preach to. How do we pull in the other folks? How do we pull in politicians and business owners? Working up in Lake County, and it's very interesting, we're doing what we're calling our immersion sites, where we're providing all of our services to a concentrated area. And we really got to talking about champions within that community. That community has been damaged by the opioid epidemic, among other various factors. I'm learning the history of it, being fairly new to California, that it used to be a Tahoe. It used to, in the 50s and the 60s, it was very thriving with regards to a destination place for certain vacations. They had a huge hotel there that had an amphitheater. And I got to talking about this group. We've got to find a champion, because they talked about the haves and the have-nots in that community. And I said, we've got to find a champion millionaire. We've got to find someone that has utilized our services that's a mover and a shaker to help become a champion. Well, someone sent me an email just last week. Someone has purchased that hotel and amphitheater, and they're revamped. They're gonna open it back up to try to. And I'm like, can you get me their number? Strategies needs to start talking to this person, so maybe they can invest in some other things. Maybe they can realize that this community needs something outside of just an amphitheater. We can use that amphitheater as a platform. We can use it as a growth place. And by the way, he's a millionaire. Maybe we can get some cash towards this effort. You know, we're always looking for sustainability. That's cross-sector partnering. Cross-sector partnering has to do with not only the people that are already invested, but reaching out to those that might not know about what we do and how important it is to our community. Hopefully, cross-sector partnerships will begin to grow and become a part of this process. And then, again, sustainability. The final module will look at how do we keep this going? How do we pass that tacit knowledge on to the next group? And we're going to do that today. We're going to start talking about it. I want you to leave with something. I love trainings that tell you how it looks, but I need this one to talk about what we need to do. How is important, but the what today is going to be paramount. What do we go out and do next? What are our next steps? Any questions so far? So if you could turn to page 19. I want to go over a few of these key concepts, because what was really important in the development of this, and I didn't give enough credit to the Office of Child Abuse Prevention, along with the Child Abuse Prevention Center of Sacramento, as well as San Diego State University and Children's Bureau. Those were the partners, and there were many fingers in this. There were many folks that collaborated to bring this together. One of the areas that they felt in our common messaging was we needed to develop key concepts so we were all on the same page. So when we define something and we're talking about, let's say, a community narrative or our community partners or just community itself, how are we defining it? Are we on the same page with what that looks like? So if you page through there, it talks about our diverse community environment, what a community narrative looks like. I'm on page 20. What are we talking about when we say community resilience? What's the foundational understanding? And what they did was they not only did research, but there was some interviewing of people and gathering information to figure out what these concepts should look like. What's community trauma over on 21? Organizational resilience. How do we make our organization resilient? So remember, we were talking about the individual, the family, the community. Well, those organizations within the community have to work on a resiliency plan as well. And then that concept of place-based community, meaning we're within that community. We're not working there and then leaving. We're trying to find the resources that are actually in the community and part of the community. So that's just to give you an idea of some of the key concepts. The point of that is so that we're, again, on the same page. We're speaking the same language. The next one I'd like to look at, is page there's a page that has a need for shared understanding. If someone can help me find it. There is no shame. 25?
Yeah.
Very nice. That's the one I was looking for. See, it's all about team. Bottom line is, research started to look at why do we need to have both? Why do we need to have this shared understanding? Why do we have to have this collective consciousness about this process? And there was a collaborative conversation that began to explore the possibilities of how do we reflect on this work that we do? How do we learn together? And one of the things is that language, but also that process. What's the process of developing resiliency? Well, it looks different all over the place, but there are some foundational key points. And that's what this need for shared understanding. What we've realized is sometimes an effort or a project fails because of competing agenda, or it fails because we didn't have the same vision or definition of what we were doing and where we were going. So the need for shared understanding was really, really important in developing that. What came out of the research were some tools. And Ellis and Dietz are the proprietors of this information with regards to building resiliency through these tools. So if you could turn to page 28, we'll look at a little bit of the tools. So each of these tools was developed, remember, we're in the shared understanding, the assessment phase. So remember, we talked earlier with regards to developing this process. We're going to assess it, then we're going to look at the readiness, we're going to talk about implementation, and then sustainability. So in the assessment process, there's some things that we have to look at. So if you could turn to page 31, please. So within this toolkit, these tools each have directions that go along with it. This particular exercise is to begin to look at the impact on the community. What are their assets to help with this? And what the process is once you identify your problem or your situation, we're going to go down this list of characteristics within each of the categories and to decide what's the impact on the community. How is it affecting it? And how is it going to influence the problem that we're trying to solve? And these characteristics are divided into three categories: socioculture, the actual physical environment, and finally, the economic environment. So if you page through, you'll see that there are three different categories. And in each of the categories are places that you have to investigate what needs to be done. How is this holding us back? So with this first tool, once we hear our community narrative, and I'll give more explanation to this, what you're going to do is take the information from that community narrative and plug it into this tool. We're going to look, so we're going to backdoor it. We're going to have the information. We're going to hear about a solved problem, or at least a problem that was on the process of being solved. And we're going to plug it in here. We're going to see what that problem looked like with regards to these categories. How did we come to our plan? How did we come to our end result? Right. So that's tool number one.
Sorry if you're going to say this, but I'm realizing some folks might think, oh, I don't want to mess up this pretty thing that I got. Some folks might say, I don't want to mess up this pretty thing that I got, but that's okay because we have it online and our online folks can access it as well on strategyca.org in our resources page. So you can download the PDF and reprint any other pages that you doodled on.
I was not going to say that, so I totally appreciate it. The big thing is that we have published this. And that we haven't had an official rollout. You're getting a sneak preview, but it is open to the public. So I implore you to use this today because you can download it, and there'll be much more to come with regards to implementation and how we go about using it. Thank you. So let's look at tool number two. So tool number two begins to talk about understanding your community and what needs have to be strengthened in order to develop resilience. So if we look at the first category talks about the people. The Post-Carbon Institute did research on community resilience. And they're classically an agency that deals in footprint, not only your energy footprint, but your environmental footprint. And what they realized is in talking about environment and health and indicators of healthy families, that there's a resiliency model that they were developing. That's where these categories have come from. So if you look at each, we're starting on page 36. You have the people, you have systems thinking, adaptability, transformability, sustainability, and courage. So these 6 areas begin to develop your plan. They're a benchmarking tool for how do we bring resiliency to the forefront within our community. So how this would look, and when we do our exercise, you will utilize it. If we were to talk about the first category, people, communities are products of human relationships. So in our case study, what aspects needed to be strengthened? So we're going to come at this from an angle of, we already know that this is a positive outcome for this case study that we're going to do. But we're going to look at it as if we're developing the plan. How did this plan come to fruition? And it'll get clearer as we get to that process. We're going to go through an activity that takes us through the development of a resiliency plan. So that's tool number 2. Our final tool, number 3, if you turn to page 40, I like this one because this is, to me, the most important aspect of the development of any plan working within communities. It's how do we go about listening to the community narratives? How do we go about polling the folks that we're wanting to help? And if you look through here, it gives different categories of questions. So on page 41, it starts to talk about how do you conduct the polling and what are the questions that you begin to ask to gather the data, both qualitative and hopefully at some level quantitative, and begins to help you understand what the problem is, what's the common language, what are the fears, what are the things that our communities feel are the changes that need to be made. Because sometimes our eye test, or what we feel like, I often tell the story of a young lady that I helped through foster care, and she was just majorly successful. You know, her child, she was a teen parent, her child had been taken away. I assisted with reunification and then stayed in contact for things like associate degrees in colleges and cars. And, you know, this is why the community narrative is important, because I met her about 10 years after working with her. And we hugged and we talked, and I'm thinking, you know, she's thanking me for all the things that I've done. And I'm remembering, oh, we drove to do the college tour. I took her on a college tour with 2 other, you know, youth. And I'm thinking she's going to talk about these things. And she said, you know, the greatest thing that ever happened was when you got me that alarm clock and I started being on time. I would have never known that if I hadn't done my community narrative work. I'm thinking that the college work and helping her find a car, and none of that was really important. You know why? Because I had already equipped her. She took credit for that. What I had to take credit for was the simple thing. So the community narrative provides us with an opportunity to know where we've made a difference, or to know where we're needed. We can't go barreling through a community with what we think is needed. So that's why the community narrative is really important. And sometimes it's not the big things, it's simply the $3.99 alarm clock that you bought. You need to know that so that you can build on that. So really important aspects to these tools and how we use them. Now, the good part about it is you're probably confused right now. You probably don't really understand these tools. I didn't either. Hence where our exercises come from. We're going to walk through this process together. We're going to look at each aspect of these tools. And we're going to have some information that's going to be provided to us that we can use as a case study to see how this tool would have worked in that situation. Were there places that it already was on the right track in this particular situation? Were there things we could have done better? So we're going to benchmark it. So I can't go through this process without talking about this model of a pair of aces. And everyone who I know who saw this for the first time and was in this field and passionate about it gasped when they saw this, because it's finally a visual for us to be able to talk about the work that we do, from everyone to a child, to maybe a family, to a politician, to a business owner. So if you could just turn to page 16. The model of this tree provides me a better understanding of the process, because it talks about that the leaves were the tree. The leaves were the outcome, meaning our aces, and the branches are the aces themselves that feed into those leaves. But we have been sadly remiss as working on the roots. The roots of this are really important to look at because it's the foundation. And I mentioned this earlier and want to go back into it. I spent a lot of time helping people, individuals. And what I realize now, looking back on it, some of them didn't have a chance because even if I couldn't have worked on their community, I didn't prepare them for the re-entrance into community. I didn't prepare them. We didn't have conversations. We were really strengths-based. We talked about all the great things that you needed to do in order to be successful. What we didn't talk about is, when you go back in the community, how are you going to be received? Are you going to get a parade? Is everybody going to be really happy for you now that you got your GED and you're getting a car and a job? Or are there going to be people that look at you differently now? That's one of the things that I never prepared people for, is that our community is a big contributor to both our success and our challenge. And if your community is not supportive of your success, you need to be prepared for that. Because I've had folks, again, that I've circled back to talk to, and they've said to me, you didn't prepare me for my loss. You didn't prepare me that people were going to be jealous of the things that I was doing. So what I've realized is that's one aspect of community that needs to be worked on when we're working with individuals and families. They're not separate.
I have a question. Sure. When, in terms of how you're speaking to community, on what level? So, of course, family, and of course, you know, in terms of subsystems. So when we're thinking about community in terms of how you're sharing it, okay, how far-reaching are we talking about?
Glad you asked that. Let's turn to page 21. Because what we start to define in this are what our communities look like. So that definition of place-based communities, where it talks about geographic locations where people connected because of their residence, occupation, or where they spend the majority of time, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about your 10-block radius. Mm-hmm. And as we know, that's affected by many things. 10-block radius is affected by economics, because the 10-block radius in a development looks a little bit different than the 10-block radius in the hood.
Right.
So what we're talking about in community actually is however you define it, but it definitely has to do with the culture of your community. Who do you spend the most time with? Mm-hmm. Who are the decision makers? Mm-hmm. How are decisions made? Are there things that happen in this community where you need to really be aware of them because you could get in trouble if not? So community is going to be self-defined, but it definitely has to do with who you're interacting with on a regular basis that have some cultural similarities. And again, our work is to build resiliency within that community. That help?
Totally.
That's why I like this key concept. Because I don't have to fish and we don't have to sit and come up. At least for this tool, we're going to know what we're talking about together. And we may further develop that. It's a lava lamp, right? It's going to ever be flowing. So we might add some things to that definition for our purpose of developing it. But that's why this is important, to have that common language. Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Someone else had it. They were just afraid to ask. So this is our foundation. Diverse childhood experiences, diverse community environments, and looking at them holistically, looking at them in a way that we can not only treat the individual, but the family and the community. Really important aspect of this. Any questions so far? So what I'd like to do is give a brief introduction. I'm going to let her introduce herself. I'm big on loyalty, and when you're tasked with planning things, you find out what loyalty is about. And this person was really loyal to me, not only as a thought partner, but in her agreement to talk to us today. I realized that I vicariously met Rebecca years and years before this because I saw her on a panel. And the panel talked about folks who had come through a particular community and what they did to succeed or what they did to fail, and just sharing their story about their past, their journey. And I was really moved by it. And it was interesting. I don't know if I even told Rebecca. I went back and I found the notes that I took from that. Your name is on it. So I'm going to show them to you to prove that this 5-year relationship is real.
5 years, wow.
Rebecca is really important to me. So the first thing that whenever I meet with Rebecca or whenever she talks to me, and we've been texting lately and talking and in preparation for today as well as other things, is Rebecca forces you to turn your judgment to wonder. Rebecca forces you to turn your judgment to wonder. And I've gotten permission to share pieces of her story, and then she's going to move us through a process. Rebecca was a client. She's been through the foster care system with her children, the mental health system, and various other systems that our families have to move through. And I don't know if you heard her introduction, but now her work is giving back and fixing and helping develop communities. It's real important to me because oftentimes we get what we call subject matter experts, but to me, subject matter experts from a book and its cognitive is nowhere near as important as the visceral subject matter experts, the folks that are our boots on the ground that have experienced things. So I want you to listen to two things when I bring Rebecca up here. First, her introduction with regards to her story. Then Rebecca is going to take us through a journey of a resilient effort of when she was a case manager working in an agency that they identified a problem and came up with a basic work plan. They identified a problem, what were the resources they had to stack against it, what were the time frames they needed, who did they need involved to be involved, and what did success look like. And what I want you to listen for throughout this is the steps that it took to build a resilient process. What were the steps? What was needed? Because then we're going to take Rebecca's story and she's going to stay available for us for questions. And we're going to apply it to these first two tools. We're going to look at what was the model they used. And what's great about it is when she told me the story, I was like, wow, this really fit. And you didn't have the toolkit yet. And then Rebecca's response says, yeah, but if we had it, there's some things that we may have done a little bit different, you know. It might have been more effective and efficient. We got it done, but maybe we got it done in 6 months where this toolkit might have helped it in 5.5 months. So I want you to listen for the things that help develop the resiliency. Look at the categories. What did the people do? What did they do to work on sustainability and transformability? Did courage come up? Were there pieces that already were within this toolkit that were organically happening that now we want to put a process and procedure to? So do me a favor. I'd like to introduce my friend and colleague, Rebecca Couch, if you could give her a round of applause.
So as Troy mentioned, I am Rebecca Couch, and I will start with a little bit of more background information. So I am, like you mentioned, a former client, but I was that high-risk client that was uncooperative, that I was contentious. I didn't want to hear what you had to say. You didn't know me. You had nothing to offer me, and I was there to utilize whatever I could get from you. And then I was gone back out into my community, which was all just chaos and destruction, right? Self-destruction. And so I have 5 children, birth children. My first 2 children ended up with kinship with my mother, and my middle 2 children were removed by CPS. And then I was not reunified. I was unable to complete my reunification plan because I was uncooperative and contentious. And also because I had barriers that I could not overcome. And part of that was because of an addiction that debilitated me. And part of that was because I didn't have the resources that are available today. So we're talking, 15 years ago. And there was not collaboration amongst community-based organizations that were supposed to be there to help me overcome the adversity that I was facing. And so it's really, really important, not just for the clients, but for community members and community-based organizations to understand that not only is this possible, but it's super, super important, and it has made a huge impact. From the time that I was a client until the time that I ended up having a fabulous mentor, I had people in my life who saw strength in me, who saw qualities within myself that I was unaware that I held. And even though I was unable to reunify, that I was able to heal with my children, and that we've established a relationship now, all very different because of the different aspects. But it's been about 11 years since that journey took place. And so my children are now 23, almost 22, 15, 14, and 9. And my youngest, my 9-year-old, was my clean and sober baby who I get to raise, but who also has mental health issues, severe. He's been 5150, which is code for that he was a harm to himself or others 4 times, and he just turned 10. And so this is something I was unprepared for, thinking, hey, now that life is clean and sober, and now that I'm all involved about giving back and how to heal relationships and resiliency. Now I'm faced with how do I navigate this? This is something totally different. And so on all levels, the collaboration between different, and I consistently say community-based organizations, but if anyone doesn't know it, I'm referring to nonprofits, agencies of service, First Five, you know, even collaborations like your maternal mental health, where people are just in the background having committee meetings talking about what can we do to help this client base that we're serving. And so I just want to encourage you, number one, not to be discouraged by hot topic terms. That was a big thing for me when I was going through my mentoring. I always felt overwhelmed by all these terms and terminology and vocabulary that everyone else seemed to be super fluent in, and I had no idea what anyone was talking about. And so when we talk about collaboration, we're talking about just really building on the relationships that we already have established and are not really aware that we have a connection with someone else, or sitting down for 5 or 10 minutes at your cubicle or at your desk or in your office and saying, you know what, I have an extra 5 minutes right now. Let me Google resources for blah, blah, blah. Something that a particular client came across your desk that day, and you're just like, man, I really feel compelled to help this person for some reason, and you Google a resource. Another thing I want to mention too is that at the Child Abuse Prevention Center, there is an information and referral line, which is available statewide, I believe, mostly within the Sacramento region, but that you can call and utilize for resources as well. And so there are people out there that can give you the resources if you don't have time to navigate it on your own. So as far as encouraging you not to be overwhelmed by collaboration, it doesn't have to be overwhelming or time-consuming. Like I said, it can be about fostering relationships you already have established, as well as maybe just reaching out and saying, hey, you know, we used you back in April for this one particular client, and I was wondering, is there any way our agencies could work together on a more regular basis, because we seem to have this reoccurring problem with our clients. And so it can be something really simple. So in my journey of resiliency, which again is a journey and not a destination, and I so appreciate that saying, I was able to have some really awesome mentors. I was able to have people who saw, and not only saw qualities within me, but voiced them. That told me, hey, you know, I see this really strong characteristic in you. You should really think about blah, blah, blah. And so sometimes I'd be like, yeah, right, I can't do that. You know, no way. Don't you know how overwhelmed I am already? But it was a seed. It was a seed of self-esteem, right? It was a seed of someone seeing something in me that eventually down the line I could look back and say, wow, maybe that really would be something that I could do. And so little by little, with encouragement, with mentorship, with people that were coming together on my behalf, I was able to overcome certain things. And so one of the things that I overcome was public speaking. I was so against public speaking ever, and now it's like my passion. If I can bridge a gap somewhere, or if I can help foster understanding or empathy from one side to the other, and it's always both sides, right? Both sides have judgment. Both sides have barriers to whether if they want to receive you or not, or whether or not your own personal aces are interfering with your ability to serve that client because you have judgment, right, already on maybe that person drinks a lot, and maybe someone in your home as a child was a drinker, and so there's that barrier already instilled in you, whether you recognize it or not. That's like, I'm not going the extra mile for this client because I have my bias, right? And we all bring that to the table. And so I ended up starting with foster kinship care education and very slowly speaking to foster parents about what a birth parent's perspective was of the foster care system and what the barriers were that we faced, because ultimately if child welfare, the overall child welfare and benefit for the child who's in the system, right, has to be for the foster parents to also feel some sort of empathy towards what the birth parents are going through. Now, whether or not the birth parents are going through what they're going through because it's self-inflicted is besides the point. Because the child sees, that's my other half. That's my 50-50, right? That's who I am. And if you can't stand my parents, then you can't stand me. And it's not, you know, a conscious thought that small children have, but that's their understanding that they receive from the foster care system, right? So my whole thing was bridge the gap the foster parents could see. But what ended up happening was that I came to an understanding and my gap was bridged, and I saw that there were people who really genuinely cared about kids who weren't in crisis and who really genuinely wanted to help and who were doing their darndest to get the information they needed to be supportive to these kids who were in total crisis, right? So sometimes that's what happens. We go into it thinking one thing or that this is our goal, and then as we're involved in it, it sort of manifests into something else, and we end up growing from it as well. So I just really encourage you to look where you can collaborate for your target populations. What are some of maybe the first 5 barriers that they really are facing, and figure out how you can establish relationships to foster growth in those areas. So through foster kinship care education, I then went into a nonprofit community-based organization that did parenting classes for crisis pregnancies. And what they did was they were able to facilitate classes from pregnancy through childbirth for either both parents or just parent and family member. And the client would then earn incentives for every hour that they spent in the class, and they were able to get the supplies they needed for the pregnancy. And so they could have like maternity clothes, diapers, formula, and all those kind of things. So it was an incentive-based education program to help combat familial dysfunction because of lack of education, right? And they were in Spanish, they were in English. If they couldn't read, if they couldn't write, they had counselors available. So there, in a lot of ways, it sort of incorporated how you can how you can raise a child through pregnancy and beyond in a healthy and loving way, right? And not be worried financially about how are you going to afford diapers, how are you going to afford formula, because all of that is given to you as an incentive. And so that was another sort of toes in the pond, toes in the pool of like, how am I helping? How am I bridging gaps? What can I do? What piece am I? How can I use my own personal journey to promote change, to affect change, to do something that will help the next person maybe avoid 1 or 2 of my barriers because I've given them these tools or planted these seeds, as Troy said. Sometimes we reach clients where they're at. And sometimes that's receptive, and sometimes that's, maybe I'll hear you out, but I really am just here because I need the diapers. And sometimes it's, I really don't want to hear anything you have to say. I'm mandated by court. I have to be here, right? So with that, when I was out in my addiction and I was in my 3rd pregnancy, I stayed at a homeless shelter for pregnant women in Sacramento. And throughout the duration of my life, from the time that I left there and into my sobriety, I had remained in contact with the director there. And so in 2016, I was asked to come on board as a resource specialist and also a case manager and partnership coordinator for a grant that had been given, but that was contingent upon being involved with another community-based organization. And so that was my role there, and I was part-time, and I came back as a professional in this shelter, and it was the shelter for pregnant homeless women. So you can imagine, and so there's 12-room capacity, right, for infant and moms, and you've got women coming in off the street who've been homeless and pregnant, usually in their 2nd or 3rd trimester, right? So you've got people who've been not eating properly, you've got people who've had addictions, you've got people who are sex trafficked, domestic violence, you name it, and we had it. Mental health issues, right? All the same issues that cause people to be homeless in the first place add to that of pregnancy and being on the streets as well, right? So it was a different perspective to say to a client, that used to be my bedroom. And people started to receive me, clients started to receive me in a way that I was unprepared for. And I thought, this is why my journey was what it was, because now today I can look at this woman here and say, don't be discouraged, that was my bedroom. And whether you can receive what I have to share with you today or not, the seed is planted. And so keep that in mind with collaboration too. We'll talk a little bit later about goals, but keep in mind how you want to gauge your goals. Is this based on success of who completes your program? How many people? Are you looking at numbers, or are you looking at people who really, really were affected and who go home and change familial legacies into something positive? And so Bishop Gallegos Maternity Home is the name of the shelter. And I left that position and came back a year later as a full-time case manager. And so my caseload was 12 women, essentially anywhere from 5 to 12, and their infants, and their CPS workers, and their probation officers, right? And everything else they brought to the table, right? Substance abuse, I also did like urinalysis on ladies when it was time to there was suspicion that maybe they were using in the home, you name it. I had 12 of them all at once at the same time, but I was in the home during my workday. So they're coming and going, they got chores, they got this, we provided transportation. And one of the things that kept coming up was a lot of these women had other children. And with the other children, they were trying to reunify. So they would have a CPS case plan. They were going through reunification services. Now that they had somewhere to lay their head, now they were able to shower, they were able to eat, and they were able to sleep. They could try to overcome this mountain of reunification. And so because we provided transportation and we didn't have a transport driver, it was whatever staff was available at the moment did the transport, right? And so we have these women with these reunification plans, and a lot of them had similar plans. A lot of them had similar requirements, similar mandated, court activities, and we were going all over the place all the time. And it was like this person would get out of class and the next person would be in class. So we're dropping, we're picking, we're dropping, we're picking, right? And so it was a problem, not just because we were utilizing staff time, but also transportation costs, right? And it seemed like there had to be a better way. So in the process of case management and resources, oftentimes what I would do is if I didn't have the solution or if I didn't have the activity that I could provide as a case manager, I went and found it through an agency who could. And one of the agencies we came across was called ICAN. It's ICAN Foundation and their victim advocacy program. And they help victims of violent crime. They either show up at court, they will show up in the emergency room when you're getting a rape kit, they will help you file a restraining order, they will help you file paperwork, they will help you relocate if it's a domestic violence situation, they will give you funding and a deposit. I mean, you name it. Victim advocacy is what this program does, right? And so because of one particular client's need, I had come in contact with this agency, and they also happened to be part of that original grant that I had mentioned previously. When I was working with a different agency, we would have these quarterly meetings where all of the collaborations would come together and sort of share what their experience was. And so I had met them there as well. And so these are all little things. Keep your ears and eyes open when you're going to all these little events and your networking opportunities. Take people's cards, take people's information, take that extra 5 minutes at the end of the meeting to really network with people and say, well, what is it exactly that you do? And then keep that little pocket full of business cards or brochures or whatever at your desk. And you'd be surprised when they come in handy. So anyhow, so I got in touch with the one particular lady, and I said,
on the conveyance.
Many times in her second or third trimester has to leave by the time that they use the envelope. So if we're lucky, if a resident actually stays the duration that she's there, we're looking at 5 months. A 5-month window and 12 weeks after she's detoxing or after she's getting her, crazy partner to leave her alone for a little while, or getting visitations or finding clothes to wear, you name it, right? Mental health issues, finding a psychiatrist, doesn't have Medi-Cal. It goes on and on, right? We all know. And so what it looked like for the ones that had time frames, we negotiated with CPS and said, can we have 10? Can we have 10? Because realistically, we might get them in for 9, right? But if we could be approved for 10-week class, we could hit our base, because we have some people who've been there already on their way out. We have some people who've been there for 3 or 4 days and got itchy and just can't stay. And so we've got all these turnover. How can we really facilitate classes that are going to be successful, where they're going to complete the program, right? And again, when you're looking at goals, are you looking at all 11 women completing all 10 weeks? Well, is that realistic? Are all 11 women mandated? Are all 11 women there for the same amount of time? Are all 11 women willing? So it's a kind of on a case-by-case basis. But so that was another part, is that we had to go through the negotiation process, right? Which again, the time limit goes on and on and on. Eventually we were approved, right? Yay. The relationship through CPS was able to make contact when I could not. And so CPS approved for 10-week classes. And what we did was we covered parenting and recovery, domestic violence, parenting and domestic violence, parenting and trauma, and just really facilitated a forum for women to come together and talk in a trusting place about what the heck they had been going through, without having to worry about a social worker up there taking notes saying, oh yeah, your name is, I heard you admit to this, because what we did as an agreement to our clients was say, our promise to you is, yes, we are mandated reporters. And yes, if we hear you say something about harming yourself or your baby, we will have to report that. However, this is a place for you to feel safe and for you to have trust. And those of us who are trying to provide service here. And so, that's actually a good thing. Okay. I love what you're, you can buy it. I lost my train of thought. That's okay. That it was private and. Oh, yes, thank you. So what we could offer them was to say, what we will tell CPS is that you were participating and you were present, and that's it. We're not going to tell them what your issues are, what you're admitting to, what you foresee as a problem with your parenting when your child comes home to you. Yes, you were present, and yes, you're participating. And CPS was accepting of that. And so it was phenomenal. I mean, there were tears sometimes, there were activities sometimes with coloring pens and crayons and laughter, but it was a place where I saw women reunify with their kids and have a whole different toolkit available to them because A, they dug out all that garbage that was sitting in there festering in the first place, right? They had someone that came in and facilitated a little bit of healing for them. And then they had tools. And they were prepared to re-enter the community because they had been secluded for this time where they could reflect and take pause and deal with the issues at hand. And so that is just one real life example of what it looked like for us to collaborate together to facilitate growth and healing. And it's super easy. And it really seemed like there were moments during the day where it felt like it was super overwhelming. I took on something extra and why did I do that? But at the end, when you look at the faces of your clients and you see that there has been actual effective positive change, it is so rewarding and so worth it. And so I would just encourage you not to be overwhelmed or discouraged when we talk about doing these collaborations with people. Lastly, I want to cover, I touched on this a little bit about what does success look like. So again, are we talking the completion of the course? How many people completed the course? We can talk to our funders and say, hey, we had 60 residents this year and 55 of them completed the course. Is that what we're looking for? Or are we looking for healing? Are we looking for resiliency? Are we looking for women who come in and they're on their 8th child and CPS is involved and they walk out of that shelter with their 8th child in their custody, relationships with their other 7 children, right? And the ability and strength within themselves to walk out the door and say, I can take it from here, right? And how do you really gauge that? Well, that's something that each individual agency will have to talk and collaborate amongst themselves in their own administrative sections to say, what does success look like to us, right? And again, if you're talking about a mother who has other children, those are all legacies. And someday she's going to be a grandma. And that's a chain and a dysfunctional link that has been broken, right? So we're talking about affecting change for generations to come. And so that's what I had to offer today. And I hope that that community narrative gives you sort of a real life example about how working together can really, really make a positive change. So I'm available.
Right? A lot of work. Now, the luxury we have is she's going to be here for questions in this process. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a break. But before we go on break for about 10 minutes, I want you to just take a moment and begin to think about the various sectors that were touched in developing this resiliency plan. And when I say sectors, I mean you had professionals, you had CPS, you had community individuals. How many times did you hear her say, we sat down together and just brainstormed to come up with this process? Essentially, we need to come up with a more effective and efficient process to move these families through a system that's kind of tough sometimes. It's tough to navigate. And the way the system is set up in this particular situation, failure, unfortunately, starts to rise up as an option because of the inability to put all of these pieces together, to take them off as bite-sized pieces. And if we put everything in the same building, it changes the face of success. You addressed trauma-informed care. There was a culture shift. You talked about resiliency. The 5 protective factors were addressed in that. If you're not familiar with any of those, we give trainings on each of them. With that, it was a story where there was a situation and a problem and a champion came in. And this champion didn't have a whole lot of money, but had time and knowledge, and then backed her life experiences up with research. And then that champion was able to bridge some gaps and start a process that was more effective and efficient moving towards resilience. What I want you to think of when we come back from break is we're going to, as groups, we're going to probably only divide into 2, talk about our plan and what points were hit. And I'll go through it with you and give you the first example. And then if we have time, which we probably won't, there's another narrative of the community. I may just show it to you to get your thought process going. So it is 5:11. Can we take 10 minutes just to refresh, breathe, and then we'll come back. We'll see if there are any questions for Rebecca, and then we'll go through the process of implementing this, looking at it as a process. All right? So 10 minutes. Come back about 7 after.
That's crazy.
Differently.
All right, welcome back. Before we dive into this exercise, I'm wondering if you, with the exercise in mind, do we have any questions? And Rebecca ran to the restroom. She's going to come back. But think of if you have any questions that we need to ask Rebecca that'll help you with this tool. So if you can do me a favor and pull out tool number 1. And the message number 30. So I'd like you to take a moment and read page 30 so that you can have an idea of the instructions. And then I'm going to amend them a little bit because we have all of the information from this, how we're going to plug it into each block. All right. Any questions about that? You have a question? I caught you in the snack time. Sorry. Yes.
Yeah, it's on. I don't know if my question or comment would be part of this section of the toolkit. It's a little bit more on measurement. And if we're not measuring how many women come in and out of the door, how many complete the classes, and we're measuring more of like what changes you made in that person and the differences. I don't know. I guess one of the threats to that would be that everybody would have a different measurement level of or scale of like what is success. So then, are we all speaking the same language? In the sense of, if my organization says that's successful and Ian says no, it's not, then are we really being successful? I don't know.
So I have
Ian's wrong.
In general, yeah.
So I have a
Fair enough.
I got a piece of an answer, but I'm going to throw that back on the group first because we got some pretty powerful minds in here. So what are your thoughts on that with regards to, so your question basically is with regards to measurement. First of all, there's going to be a strong qualitative point to this measurement, meaning how do we define healing? Let's say that's one of the things we're talking about potentially measuring. Did healing occur? So what does healing look like? Because your healing will look different than my healing. And is that part of the common language? Would that be part of a common language divide? Right? So your question is, how do we keep this collective thought process if our measurements look different or have to look different? I don't have the answer, but I'm good at restating it. Anybody want to tackle it first?
I think within your own agency, it's a decision that you sort of make based on each individual client. Like, do you serve clients in groups or do you serve clients individually? And what would that look like in a generalized, like, within your agency, what would that definition be generalized?
Right.
And then when you work with other agencies, say, this is what our success looks like. How can we adapt that to match what your success looks like? And then have sort of the one that you use interagency and the one that you use for agency collaboration. That would be mine.
You have another comment?
I would add that you also need to even start just on a more personal level. You know, the people who you have in your own agency working on the same task, they have to agree on what a success may mean for your own agency's mission. Because we've had, even in our own small situation, that we have had really different definitions on what success means, what beginning to end means, what's finishing a task. And so making sure that first of all, you guys are all in agreement, and then as you're moving forward and out into the world, this is what this means to us, because it, you know, I think it's hard to stay on message if everybody has a slightly different message.
So my feedback to that is very similar to what's been said. The first thing that came to mind was just that. Are we going to be on the same page, and how do we go about doing that? And I think that there's going to be some overarching definitions and then some nuances under each agency. And that's kind of what everybody has already put out there. I often think back to when I was a new social worker and I was going to get every kid I worked with in college, every single one of them I was going to get into college. And then I realized some of them were just trying to eat tomorrow. Mm-hmm. So my college goal was still maybe doable, but there were a bunch of goals in between that we had to discuss. And so it's very similar to that to me in getting on the same page. My thought also went to Lake County. I mentioned Lake County earlier. You've got 14 partners. We've got probation at the table. We've got mental health, any other
developmental disabilities, family resource center, yeah.
All of them, we have some common goals, but you can only imagine the different goals between probation and, let's say, the family resource center. So what we've had to start to do is use words like healing, use words like resiliency, but then define them. And then you take this definition we have, and then you have to take it back to your agency and then determine what success looks like. So I have the feeling this whole concept of brainstorming and collaboration really come into play there, because we've got to make sure we have this common goal, but then the nuances still meet that. And that's hard sometimes within communities. And maybe you have to set goals that are not mutually beneficial, but have some level of benefit to each person. So it may totally benefit this group over here and only partially benefit this group. But if we identify that, that's half the battle. So I have the feeling the dialogue is going to be the most important aspect in that, because we can't account for setting goals until we can't account for setting goals that we all have until we sit to the table and decide what the problem is. So I think that's where it kind of starts. Problem development. What's our problem statement? What do we want to accomplish? And then what are our differences and our similarities? Mm-hmm. So long answer to a short question, but I think it's all based in that collaborative communication model. Else want to add to that?
Yeah, so just to verify my understanding, so it sounds like if getting them to college was the ultimate goal, that was the major goal. And then from there, you're looking at, you have to have a breakfast program in place, you have to have a probation liaison in place, et cetera, et cetera. But the common goal is to get everyone to college, but everyone is facing a different battle.
Totally. And what I realized is I had to shine that goal up every once in a while, remind them of what that end goal was, you know, and then sometimes change it, pull it down off the rack because it's not a goal any longer, and put the one there that makes the most sense. So, important piece. Mm-hmm. So as far as tool number one, you read the directions. Tell me how it works. What you read. Tell me how it works.
Go through each characteristic and mark the impact you think it's currently having on the community.
Totally. Anything else that you would use it for? How about that last page? Page number 33. Just our assets. So once we determine those pieces, what are our asset models, right? Who do we need? And they say check the box, but to me, it also is enough space to jot some notes down. You know, I don't need this person now, but once we accomplish these three goals, I'm really going to need them, so I need to stay in contact with them, sort of concept. So if we go back to the beginning, if we go back to page 31, with regards to Rebecca's story, the biggest impact to me, if we were going down, or one of them, would be the domestic violence. And the impact probably has a pretty extreme impact. And the potential influencer, or how is it influencing the situation? Well, it's influencing the situation because it's really the foundation. It's the reason that they're there. They're trying to combat going back to that relationship they're trying to combat. How do I move forward without that relationship? Whatever the case may be. So the influencer is really the problem as well to me. Just an example. Now, there are many more that could potentially come out with. But that's how we want to kind of dialogue about this. What were the situations what was the impact of each of these on that particular situation? And then we're going to go to the asset. We know one of the biggest assets was Rebecca herself. But we heard about a few more. We heard of some champions in there that made some introductions, you know, and we might not remember the name, but we remember there were some introductions that were made that were a true asset. Like, this might not have happened otherwise. Why do we need to document our assets? Outside of the obvious.
Reminder for encouragement.
Reminder for encouragement. What else?
Resiliency.
Definitely. Wow. Are they a build? And what I mean by that is, if we talk about our assets, can we use that and duplicate it somewhere else? That's why I think talking about our assets or our positives is so important. Not only is it strength statement, but it lets us remember and helps our clients remember, okay, I succeeded over here, and a couple of those tools that I developed will apply over here. Well, the same as the asset. This was an asset for this, but I need to remember it could be an asset to build on. So I'm thinking from the back. That's sustainability when you look at your assets. How do I keep this person in my stable, keep them close enough, keep their business card up on my computer for when I need them for this next phase? So that's that sustainability piece, meaning I've identified an asset, or what were the assets in the community, and I want to build on those. I want to make sure I keep those close. I want to keep those close to the vest because they were really important. Make sense? So that's the first tool. If we turn to page 36, so what areas needed strengthening? And as you can go back, the directions are pretty self-explanatory, because in this one, you're pretty much checking which of the boxes it applied to, and then making a prediction almost. How would the community react? So the difference in this is we know the end of the story, right? So we're going to kind of have to back into it and fill this information out. But in the predictions category, we can kind of imagine, or I'd like you to imagine what the group was, both the client, the professionals, CPS involved. What do you think they predicted in a particular category? So community member involvement, let's say we pick that one because we needed those ladies to buy in. You remember? Mm-hmm. There was a piece where the buy-in had to happen, that they agreed, that they needed the trust. So yeah, I think that needed some strengthening. My prediction would have been probably different than others, because when I heard Rebecca was involved and was going to tell her story, my prediction would have been that asset we need to really capitalize on, because they're going to develop a level of trust with Rebecca that they probably won't develop with me. So that's how it starts to become my prediction. That would have been my prediction. And predictions also go with assets. So if I were to predict that Rebecca's story helps create trust, she's an asset now. I need to remember that I've got this in my stable when I need her to tell that story again, to bridge some gaps, to create champions, to start the process of change. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So thinking about assets, sustainability, where do they lie? That's what these first two tools are. It's an identification tool. How do we identify our pain points? How do we identify our needs? So what I want you to do in groups, and if these groups combine maybe, or no, we can keep them separate. That's 3, 3, and 4. Let's keep 3 groups. What I'd like you to do, and Rebecca will be available to you. That's kind of why I was saying it. I might want you to be a little more available. You guys are going to cheat because she's in your group.
Okay.
So what I'd like you to do is take this tool and to start thinking about what it would have looked like prior to you knowing the ending, because we know the ending. So walk through the process of what would have fit into this with regards to identifying assets. Where are the strengths? Where are my pain points? Because the first one is really about our pain points. For those of you that are online, what I'd like you to do is the same exact exercise. If you have any questions for Rebecca, please send them to our chat and we'll pass them on to Rebecca immediately and we'll make sure to get you an answer.
Can I interject something real quick?
Yeah.
So what I didn't realize in the story, if you look on page 31, as far as gauging the impact and discrimination, so we had ladies that were there for domestic violence. We had ladies that were there for child abuse and neglect. We had ladies that were there because they were sex trafficked, you name it, right? Well, there was discrimination among the ladies. So you have these ladies who are all taking the same class for the same reason, right? But they're like, oh, I'm not her. You know, I never was that, or my situation is so much different, or, you know. So that was something that we never would have, that we didn't anticipate initially. And then when we were faced with it, it was like, no, mercy and compassion, we're all here at this stage in our lives in the same shelter for a reason. So we're going to have mercy and compassion at this table, and this is how we're going to get through this. And so that was one of the things that was a barrier that we were actually able to address as well. So those are things to keep in mind, that there's going to be these unforeseeable things within your clients that are going to come up as well.
Excellent example. So thanks for giving another example. So discrimination, the first on the list. But when we think of discrimination, we think, you know, majority group versus marginalized group, things like that. Well, within this population, there were some pieces to that that reared its head, that discrimination piece. So thinking of those things and putting them as part of this process are really important. Thank you, Tina. So we're going to take some time. I'm going to ask you to report out from your tables just some of the dialogue that you had, but I'm going to give you some time to go through tool 1. After you've done that for a while, I'll let you know if you can to move on to tool 2. But I want you to discuss a few things. What you feel like needs to be checked, but why? Where do you go from here with regards to this particular piece? Knowing that what we're going to do in our next tool, are there some builds we have to make sure we understand in the first tool in order to better fill out the second tool? All right? Any questions?
Just want to clarify then, because I'm into the tool get to. When we look at the impacts versus the influencer, it's kind of, influencer is more forward-looking. Impact is kind of the current snapshot of how this has gotten us to where we are. And the influencer is where this might be going.
Thank you for clarifying that, because what we want to look at with regards to discrimination is how is that going to affect the program and what do we need to implement to make sure that it's squelched. So that would be the influence going forward would have been a disconnected group. You know, the influence of discrimination in that case would have been people feeling judged or not feeling like they could share, so we don't have trust within this group. That's what the influence is. Is that where you're going, Michael?
Yeah. Thank you.
Definitely. Good point. Good point. And we are here as a resource, both for our folks online and in the room, to have dialogue if you have any questions as we move along. And then, like I said, we're going to report out and see what it looked like for both tool number 1 and tool number 2. All right? Have at it. In there But I also, that from the knowledge you have, but I also want you to think of what would I have done if I hadn't had that? Meaning, they had this tool. Let's say they had the tool. Well, they would have been filling it out wrong, right? They would have been filling out with no knowledge. I want you to think about both sides. You have it. How does that look when you're filling it out? But also, if I didn't have this, what would these answers, how would they look different? Good question, Rebecca. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
If
That was the prediction.
It's interesting, we're like moving through school too, and we're finding like this.
Yeah. I mean, it really gets.
They are within.
But when life is so overwhelming, the things that you can control are battles.
So
Yeah, it really matters.
What they would share, because that's the goal here, right? We are now sitting like as this group. Okay.
Remember, we thought about it as a tool that we didn't know anything.
Right.
But they can't strike.
There's no internet
stuff
stuff.
on the record.
Right.
You can't unhear things.
Yeah.
So that's why we're gonna balance. Because when I went through the tool, knowing that's what I had to start doing. Okay, I do know this. What would I have thought in my head?
Yeah.
Right.
But the subject is creating this is what will create conversation.
Right.
And I felt some of the same pieces is that, okay, is this too broad? And how do I make a prediction?
Well, no, we already had that.
Enough information. She pretty much the story she told.
We already had that.
Yeah.
We talked about, she told me, and we kind of tailored it to meet the message. So when I came across that baby,
politicians, for instance. I don't know that if we're considering this group of 12 women that they are going to know who their senator is, where their polling place is, when the election is. However, it does affect them, but it's not my belief that they would care, but I'm like getting that I have a bias in there.
Agree.
Yeah.
This is where the dialogue is.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Train them all together. We all come out with these.
Yeah. Yeah.
We're not there yet.
Right.
Yeah.
So does it need strengthening? Yeah. We probably don't even put that down yet.
Right. They need the alarm clock. They need to
Right,
get out of bed. They don't need to, yeah.
Well, and it's interesting because I almost facetiously said, well, they'll say something about Donald Trump, but in a way, it's there is kind of a blame,
Yeah.
like of, nobody cares about anybody anymore, and that
Right.
there's not to get from there about what you can do to influence politicians is some steps down the road, but it's in on their mind. And I don't know if I know you had raised that angle as well. I don't know if that addresses what you were thinking of.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So I worked with a program called Walk a Mile.
Cool.
Their advice.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I think how scared I was, I didn't really know what to do with it.
Right.
Then we have our secret arm, Jamie.
Cool. All right.
So let's come back together for a moment, should I say, wrap your conversations up. I'll let you say your last statement, and then we'll come back together.
My last statement, and I'll be right back.
What's cool though? It really does kick up.
Yeah, I like that.
So if you guys haven't realized, I'm way less cognitive, far more visceral. I'm far more like, I want you to leave with a feeling rather than a thought, because thoughts are fleeting, So in you feeling this stuff out, what were your feelings? Like, what did it do for you? Did you have any aha moments? Because I know, so I had an opportunity, fortunately, to do this before you. Rebecca told me the story. I kind of walked through it, backed into it, came into it forward. But there were some visceral things that started to come up that I was starting to apply to my life or my work or all of those. Did that happen for anyone? Was there any response? You nodded emphatically.
In our office, we have a statement that we use both about the work that we do, the families where we say all the things. Actually, Nicole is the one that coined that. All the things. You've got to think of all the things, and that's one of the things as we're going through this. All the things. Did they have breakfast in the morning? Do they have internet? How are they thinking about these things? What language do they speak? Can they get there? I mean, we haven't even gotten people in the same place yet, and we've already got 87,000 challenges, all the things.
What did this tool do for that? The all the things conversation.
We didn't get that far. We were still talking about all the things.
And listen, all the things is the important piece. But you know what I like about this? I think I say this often in training, is that I do this work because of the mistakes that I made. As a worker, there are things that I did wrong. Nothing was fatal, but there's some opportunities I missed. So what I did was I started to walk through this in my previous life, my 20-something life. What would I have told my 20-something life with this? And what it did for me is it started to put things in categories that I already knew were there, but it gave it some organization. That I can now look at these different things within these three categories, the socio-culture category, the physical environment category, and the economic category. So in looking at them, it just gave me some order, because I've thought about all this stuff before. It's not rocket science. I thought about everything on here. I've had to have interactions with everything, but have I thought about it from an impact and asset-based lens? I may have, but I didn't do it in an organized way. So very much so, all the things, hopefully this starts to give you some bucket, to put things in.
I think just to lead across with that, I love our little table because I think it's relatively diverse in some way. You bring a little bit of different pieces, and I think one of the things, I like all the things, and I've always told people, you need to walk in the room and realize you own just such a little sliver of information. Mm-hmm. And the reality is, until we all start putting those slivers together, and certainly I don't use the word client, but the individuals I work with, the families, children that I work with, I think we make so many presumptions. And so until you start to sit down and really, this is a nice task to start having a broader base of trying to slither that, all things that we need to put in there around what did it take them to get here today? What are they bringing with them? What's their history? What they didn't get? Really, are they starving? What was fed to them or not fed to them? Are we providing? It's just, you don't know. And I've known Rebecca longer, I guess, than all of you in this room. And there's still a lot of things I don't know. And there's so many things that I do appreciate. And I think the same goes back and forth. And as we can kind of integrate our lives, you start to know more about all those things, right? And just be so clear that we only know what we know.
Yeah. And this helps organize at least that sliver too at some level. You know what I mean? But kind of go out and find out what other people can contribute to that. Because that asset sheet I thought was kind of important. And Rebecca wanted to add some things. Could you add the things that you said you didn't mention that you felt were assets? No, I want them to be honest with me, and if they figured it out before you, they're going to tell us. So the honor code's in place.
So one of the assets that we had that came across as we were talking in this group was that if there was an economic asset, which I had failed to mention previously. So a lot of times what happened with the residents was that if they couldn't get into the free parenting classes that were CPS approved, they had to go to the sliding scale classes that were approved because they only had 12 months to reunify and every minute counted. And so by us having free classes available, we were an economic asset to them. But then the savings that we had in transportation costs was an economic asset to us. And so that was one. Then the residents were allowed to have their infants with them during class. So there was no need for childcare, no need for scrambling, no need for drop off and pick up and extra transportation from here to babysitter and everything else, or to have some stranger holding your newborn baby, right, while you're in a class and you're constantly just anxious about that. They could breastfeed at the table because we were at home, right? So you could breastfeed, you could change your baby, you could have your baby with you. And then one of the things that came up from the dialogue here at the table was that they facilitated connections and shared experiences. And that was something that we would have projected if we had been looking at it ahead of time, that not only was there discrimination, but there was also connection by saying, I had this one opinion of this girl ahead of time or this woman ahead of time. And after this class, I can see her in a totally different light because now I know what her struggle is. And so there was a connection. So.
And that's one of the most important aspects to this is that trust and that I'm not in it alone, you know. I've experienced it directly as a parent, you know, when I found out that my oldest son had carved his sister's name trying to get her in trouble into our crown molding. And I went to one of my mentors and I was like, you know, if he did this, he was like, oh, that's nothing. My son burned the garage down at that age. And I'm like, well, this little crown molding is not too much, right? So when we start talking to people and realizing that they've got a story too, and their story may bring them closer to me and to develop trust, and it's therapeutic. So real important aspect, definitely. Thank you for sharing. So what else? Because we're gonna spend the last moments talking about next steps. But what else in tool 1 or 2? What came to light? Was there anything that was going on where you were like, okay, this I see this clear, or maybe even we could start the conversation of how can you use this? What process does this start? Does anybody see a use at their agency? Or where it could be used?
Well, it draws a focus.
Definitely
It draws a focus. It's not only organized in a bucket to put all the stuff in, but it's a focus. So like you can say, okay, check that one off, check that one off. That's not going to be applicable. Don't need to worry about that. And I'm sure at some point after, you know, the first quarter or whatever, you go back and redo this again and say, okay, well, this is what we thought in the beginning, but this is what it really is.
A reflective practice. Definitely. Anybody else? Can they see any uses? Maybe not necessarily at their agency. Maybe there's some places that we've been within our community. I've tried to apply it to things that we're thinking will be audiences in our future. Anybody else have any application pieces to it? Or what would your next steps be? So if you were to utilize this, what would some next steps be? Or where do you see the usage?
I think it's important. Everyone wants to feel successful, whether it be the individuals working with or this group. Everyone wants to feel a level of success. So what this helps me understand is if all of a sudden we were 3 parole officers, it'd be a very different life, but if we were 3 parole officers and we were having this conversation, we're having a different conversation. If you guys are the women, you're having a different conversation. So, but if the whole point, and it is, you know, for mobility and healing and resiliency, I think it's important that I understand what you think is important versus, and I can do that because you did the work and I did the work, and now we can, like the intersectionality of that is, it would just be so fascinating to see, like, if we were to take this tool, what are your top 3? I guarantee they're different. So if we all want to feel successful, then I need to know what's important to you. You know, it's like broad and vague, but it's helping me understand when we're building out measures and steps, et cetera. We can't just leave an entire group behind that's integral to moving this forward. You know what I mean?
Knowing where each other comes from is
a
huge piece.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it works in so many different places.
Yeah.
As you know, I always use examples of myself. Well, when my wife works that 12-hour day, everybody knows how to respond to her in my house, right? So, because we know where she's coming from that day. We know there's probably some bubbles and wine involved, right? But bottom line is, I got to know where you're coming from because we might go like this if you don't. And this tool starts to develop an understanding of each person's needs. I have one here, and then I got you.
My first thought is that we are filling this out as the service providers. So then my thought was, what if we were to give this tool to the actual women who were in the program to see what their thoughts were on the impacts? Then you'd have a much more accurate or valid, I should say, perspective on what's really happening in the community.
And that's kind of piggybacking on Lindsay, because the bottom line is this, but I want to point something out, is it's user-friendly. You could, how many tools do we fill out that you couldn't give to the folks you work with, you know, the families and children? And this is one that's pretty transferable as far as knowledge and understanding, you know? So, important piece, definitely.
We kind of do a little bit of this when we're doing the developmental screenings and returning the results to the family, because what we as educators see as the concern, if it does not pertain to what the family sees as the concern, they don't hear what we're saying anyway. So I have to listen to their concerns and see what they think the problem is, and then relate to their problem the other issues we're seeing on the screenings. Make it fit.
It's a constant revisiting of our understanding of the situation, the problem, the assets. So we've got to keep talking, because half the battle are the folks we working for, you know? I mean, working for. We have to work with them, but we are working for them as well, you know? And I've been challenged, and you've reminded me, the word client, trying to pull it out as well. So today I've mentioned children and families a whole lot in community. And my other one is deal with. I've been dinged on that by my participants, and I'm really, we don't deal with our folks, you know, so I'm working on my wording. I appreciate you bringing that
Well, I
up.
think just that word client just seems like a disparity. I have all the answers and you're this mere client. And the reality is, I love this, you know, our focus group of, you know, we're trying to build this California FYI, and I've been doing youth focus groups, caregiver professional focus groups. And it's just really interesting when you go and, you know, we're really trying to better serve youth. What do they want? What do they see? What do they see as success? What do they see as our, you know, that we can provide to them? What are their needs? And it's really interesting if you can bring some of that information together. And I don't want to be a client personally, and sometimes I need to be a client. So
how about if they referred to us as clients?
Right.
That would be a different battle, you know. So thank you for bringing that, because words are important in what we do. So they're really important. So what are the next steps? What can we do? So is there anyone, and I'm not this entire tool, but maybe one of them, is there anyone that could apply it and is willing to do so? Go back and just take one of the tools and walk through it. And we maintain contact. I already owe Liz, because now your stuff did drop into junk. It was in my junk mail, so it did drop into junk, but I owe Liz. So if Liz, you help me out, you know, you'll be paid nonprofit handsomely. I don't know what that looks like, but that's okay. So I guess what I'm asking is, would each of you who are going back to an agency be okay with me connecting with you after this? You know?
one of the things I know I could offer, since I'm still wholeheartedly in a great place at Woodland Community College, we have, as you've been there, you know, a huge room. Building 800 is our community room, which I know I can get at no cost. And one of the things it's been a long time, but when Julie Galelo was still the executive director of First 5 YOLO, she was masterful at bringing the partners of the community together. I don't think it's happened since, you know, for the last 4 or 5 years. One of the things I loved is that she would have monthly convenings, and at some of them, she had designed ways that we were interacting. And wouldn't it be lovely if we all could come together again, have this opportunity to share out, switch information and cards. You come prepared to say, how do we connect and network better? Have all of our constituents that we're looking partly to serve, so that if we're doing small group workouts or world cafes, we have the Rebecca's at the table, we have the children. I mean, what do we need at the table to really find out how do we better build a resilient community? And I know I missed the meeting. YOLO did you go yesterday to the all-day building resilient YOLO? So I have to say I wasn't there, and I think, you know, perhaps that's what they did. I apologize that you just too many places to be, but I do think I offer up.
I'm in the same boat.
I do offer that up as, you know, if you guys, anybody, I certainly would host it, house it.
So next steps, bringing some partners together to see if we can utilize them in looking at this, you know. And we're not at the point of measurement, like true measurement, where we're asking you to commit to this many meetings. But what we are, for me at least, is I'm at an implementation and qualitative response kind of gathering of, you know, information. So I'd like you to bounce it off of folks that are boots on the ground, you know, and maybe Michael and I can come up with a few categories. If you can get it to a client, here I went. You heard me? You got it to your children and family, you know, folks we work with and for. See what they think about it, you know. Does this help? And I want you to keep in mind goal setting. You know, is there a means of setting goals with this? Does this start the foundational conversation? Because it was interesting over here, Lindsay asked a question about vagueness in the second tool. Like, if we're talking about politicians in that first category, can it be vague? You know, what does that look like? And how will we come together? Well, I think this is a conversation tool, and that's the dialogue we had. Because if you feel as if politics, it doesn't matter whether I vote, you know, and we can start, so the dialogue about here's how it does. And imagine if we mobilized all 12 of those women once we got them through the program and marched them down to City Hall on the day at the Capitol, and we had some conversations about the fact that we were able to put together a program that helped to limit the fallout of someone trying to complete a case plan, right? So that's where politics would come into play. On down to just the grassroots level of, is there a politician we can talk to that can get to know our constituents or their constituents because they're making decisions for them? So I think this is a conversation tool as much as anything. How do we begin the dialogue of goal setting to develop a resilient plan? Any questions or comments? Because what I'm going to do here is, I saw heads nod, I know where you live, so with that, you know, I'll make some contact.
I like how you turn you owing Liz into Liz doing something.
See how that because I'm going to pay her back first, but then I'm going to ask a favor as soon as I pay her back. So are there any...
all I did was email.
See how that works? Now you're intertwined.
Right.
So with that, are there any final comments on this tool or the things that we've talked about? Because our hope is that this is the start of something. Our hope is that it's the development of some effective and efficient process, because we know all of this stuff, again, but we put it in a cogent manner that can potentially be rolled out somewhere. So if you could fill out your evaluations. You have evaluations? Yes. So we're going to hand out some evaluations. Our online participants, you will get an evaluation when you close down your browser. It'll shoot you up a means of filling out your evaluation. They're really critical and important to the things that we do. And I'm allowed to give you 10 minutes. Oh, I forgot one thing. You have to pull your phones out.
Oh, yeah.
You have to pull your phones out.
Smartphone.
Your smartphone.
Get onto Facebook.
And if you have Facebook, I need you to go find Strategies 2.0.
Right now?
I need you, and I didn't ask, but I knew most of the people in the room. I had already asked before about pictures. So we did take some pictures. And if you could go in and like it or make a comment or
Share your resiliency motto.
share your, so I'm only as good as the people I work with and for.
On Twitter?
Share your resiliency motto we came up with today.
Liz, thank you for liking my page.
What are we supposed to do when we get
So we have a post. I'm trying to figure out how to find the post.
Yeah, tell me what, I see Strategies 2.0.
So,
Brenda? Today?
Yeah.
On Saturday?
Yep.
It says the last one you had.
do a search for Strategies 2.0.
No, we have another one today too. Need an update. This is your picture.
And click on posts when you get to the profile. And then the first post is posted by Lana, and that's us.
That's the Facebook post is where the photos are shared.
Oh, okay.
In Sacramento, the Capital Learning community kicked off the day by crafting personalized resilience mottos. What is your motto for resilience? And we tagged a couple organizations. I think we tagged them. It doesn't look like it in the text.
You figured it out? Oh, I don't know anything about that.
I'll tweet.
I don't know how to tweet.